Hi, I'm Meg. Welcome to Plant Fit Meg. Welcome back to the channel. Today is a very, very exciting episode. I have an extremely special guest here, Ben Mitchell. If you're not familiar with Ben, which you should be, by the way, I've mentioned him on the channel before. Ben is a national board certified health and wellness coach. He has a degree in exercise science. He is a competitive bodybuilder and a plant-built team athlete. He also just so happens to be my coach. So welcome to the channel, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me on the channel, Meg. I'm really looking forward to getting into our topic of conversation today. And I appreciate, of course, the very kind introduction. Looking forward to talking about all things bodybuilding and getting into kind of my journey and then kind of segueing into how we came to work together and, looking forward to talking about your future as well. So I live and breathe bodybuilding. So anytime that I get the chance to talk about it with someone, I'm all, I can talk for a long time, and I know you feel the same.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the channel. It's been a great experience working with Ben as my coach. Just so you guys in the audience know, he's amazing. The Vegan Proteins team is amazing. But before we get into sort of my story and sort of my situation with bodybuilding, which I've touched on the channel before if you've been watching. But let's start with Ben and how he got started with bodybuilding. So Ben, I would love to hear what got you started in this bodybuilding world. How long have you been in this world of bodybuilding and what got you started?
If you had asked me when I was younger, let's say maybe high school or around there, I would have been shocked if you had told me that I would go on to be a bodybuilder later in life. In fact, I can't even really think of what I would have thought of bodybuilding back then, just because
Yeah.
it wasn't really on my radar. So the way that I got into bodybuilding, I suppose, was kind of a natural evolution of me getting into fitness. And how that started was growing up, I played a variety of sports. I played football, basketball, soccer, baseball. I tried a lot of different sports and didn't really find one that I completely loved. So I was always kind of active growing up, but never the most sporty or athletic type, whereas my younger brother was the star soccer player and football player. So there's certainly some genetic component, I would say, inside of me that maybe has that potential, but I had never really latched onto something that I loved doing. And then in high school, I started playing Ultimate Frisbee, which, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with Ultimate Frisbee, it's kind of like a combination between football and basketball and soccer. So you're on a team of people, you're trying to pass the Frisbee to each other. It's usually played 7v7. One thing that's cool about Ultimate is actually a lot of the higher level is mixed. It's a mixed sport, so men and women play on the same team together. So I think that's kind of unique and something that you don't see all the time. And so essentially you cannot move when you have the frisbee and you're throwing it to your teammates and trying to get it into the end zone. And if it hits the ground, then the other team gets it. So it's kind of like soccer, and that play is always ongoing. So I got into that. I had a lot of friends who were playing that, and I played that into college. And when I was in college, I decided that I wanted to study exercise science. Now, I actually went in undeclared and had no idea what I wanted to do. I've always been someone where I felt like whatever path I decided to take with my education or with my career, I wanted it to be something that I was passionate about, that I enjoyed doing. So I was kind of trying to find a way to combine my interest and passion. And at that time, Ultimate Frisbee was the most important thing in my life. I feel like I've always kind of latched onto something in my life, and like that's the only thing I can think about 24/7, which I think probably was maybe a warning sign or an indication that bodybuilding would become a really big thing later on and become that. So halfway between my sophomore year and junior year of college, in the summer in between there, I found a book lying around my house, and it was about strength training. And so I figured, hey, this could be a good thing to try out, or at least to learn about, even if I wasn't going to do it myself, because I could be using that with the athletes that I am rehabbing or prehabbing. And so I read the book, and I picked it up and actually flipped through it, and it was talking about tracking your nutrition, and it was talking about using a food scale and weighing stuff out. And that turned me off immediately. Funny enough, I was like, this is too much work. I don't want to do this. So I actually stopped reading the book, but then I came back to it about a week later and I said, maybe there's something to this. So I read the whole book, And I then decided, hey, I'm going to use this as a way to experiment on myself and see what happens. So I started following the things that had been laid out in the book when it came to tracking your nutrition and getting on a basic training program. And that really kind of got me into fitness, and I was definitely bit by the bug, so to speak. So then over the next couple of years, I slowly transitioned into more of that kind of strength training. And so at first I was trying to figure out, do I care about training for strength, or do I care more about training for, to put on size? And I quickly realized that I really liked the kind of aesthetic component of training. Of course, there's all the health benefits that come from it, but I really liked the idea of kind of getting to shape my body in a certain way. And if you hear about some of the older school bodybuilders, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about it, he talks about kind of viewing your body as the sculpture. And, as a sculptor would put a lump of clay here to kind of accentuate a certain muscle group and the beauty that is every person's own body, and kind of, sculpting it that way. That really appealed to me. So, I always thought that bodybuilding was cool after that, but I never really pictured it as something that I was going to get into. I just kind of wanted to be fit and healthy. I ended up losing some weight to start, and I, saw my abs for the first time, and that was like, whoa, like mind blowing moment. Like, hey, I can actually do this. Like, I'm not some unicorn that I can't, see my abs or whatever. It's not just like some genetic thing that I was born with. So I would spend all my free time reading articles and listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos. Anyone who knows me knows I watch everything on like the max speed that I can comprehend it, so I can just get as much information in my brain as possible. So eventually that led me to natural bodybuilding, which was a really cool concept for me that I didn't even know existed. Bodybuilding, and bodybuilders, they take performance enhancing drugs and they take steroids. And so it was like either this choice of, I can try to be a bodybuilder and maybe like see what I can do, but there's going to be all these health consequences as a result of it. And that, that's kind of scary. Or I can kind of just try to be fit and healthy and, see what happens. So I discovered natural bodybuilding, and this kind of sparked an idea in my head of, what if I was to compete in that someday? And that was kind of a scary thought, because I was like, I'm so far off from where I want to be. And I looked at all these competitive bodybuilders, and actually the first quote unquote natural bodybuilder that I came across was someone who's actually known for being like the best natural bodybuilder of all time. This guy named Doug Miller. Wow. And so I saw that physique, and I'm like, no way that's natural. It's not possible. But then, I found more podcasts and YouTube videos and articles talking about this sport of natural bodybuilding. And I was seeing all these physiques, and I was like, that's mind blowing that you can accomplish that, naturally without taking anything. And so that was really inspiring to me. And so I said to myself, maybe I'll compete 5-10 years down the road when I've got a lot of experience under my belt. And it just seemed like something that I would consider one day, but was never really something that I was like really seriously thinking about. So I trained for a couple years. That was when I discovered natural bodybuilding was a thing. That was probably about 2 years into me, picking up weights for the first time and really getting into it. And then for the next 2 years, I really committed myself to doing some things that weren't the most comfortable. Like I was quite lean, and when walking around that way, and I became kind of attached to that identity, having that identity shift for the first time. And I didn't really want to let go of that, but I also knew that I needed a little bit more, not even a little bit, I needed more muscle to really do what I wanted to do in the future. So I decided to go through these cycles of, intentional muscle building phases where you're kind of slowly gaining weight over time, in a as healthy as, as healthy of a way as you can do it. And then going through, these fat loss phases. And this is what you hear about when you hear bodybuilders talking about bulking and cutting. It's this idea of like intentional muscle building phases, accepting a little bit of body fat gain as part of that, understanding that muscle is very protective, especially as you age, and then you kind of strip away that body fat that you accumulated during that phase, and you go through these cycles, and over time the idea is you get more muscular in your physique. So I did a couple of those, and then at the end of 2023 I decided that it was time that I wanted to experience that for myself, and I decided to jump into it, and for better or for worse, coached myself through that process, and got the leanest that I had ever gotten. And there was a lot of ups and downs, probably more downs than ups throughout that experience. But it led me to where I am today, and so I have no regrets about it. And it's made me certainly a better coach for it, especially with competitors and being able to take them to stage and actually say, I've been in your shoes. I know to an extent how you're feeling, and really being able to, like, empathize with them and say, hey, like, I remember how that felt, and this is how we're going to get through it. And again, so yeah, it was a mixed experience, but it was something that I'm oddly really looking forward to again, even though I know it's going to be a couple years before I'm ready to do that, because it is a toll on your body, and it's hard to compete all the time.
For sure. There's so much in there that I want to comment on, but I know with the Arnold sort of his quote and his kind of take on it, that it's really about sculpting and that bodybuilding is like kind of creating this sculpture with your body. I love that perspective too, and I find that really interesting and really appealing. And so you coached yourself. How did you decide that you were going to be your own coach and do it that way versus hiring a coach? Because that's something that I've heard over and over and over again in doing my own research before I hired a coach was hire a coach. Don't do it solo, especially for your first time around. So what made you make that decision and, go in that direction?
As we know, we can often be our own worst enemy when it comes to taking the advice that we know that we probably should take. So there's definitely a component of that. There's probably a component of, you could call it pride or arrogance. Arrogance isn't quite the right term, but just wanting to kind of see like, okay, does my knowledge actually stack up? Like the things that I talk about, could I actually, apply it to myself? And I'd heard people talk about it before, like, yeah, it's hard to remain objective, especially when you get really deep into it. Your brain chemistry almost starts to change. And I'm like, I want to experience that. Like, even if it's a kind of a negative outcome and I don't get exactly the outcome that I want to, see for myself and like learn that lesson. If that lesson is that I should get a coach next time, let me actually experience, like sometimes as as a coach, I'm sure you know this as well. Like you can tell somebody something, but sometimes they just have to learn it for themselves before it really sort of sinks in. And so part of me was like, yeah, I probably would be good to get a coach here, but I kind of want to see if I can do it myself. Part of it was also maybe testing some kind of strategies and methodologies that I probably wouldn't try with a client of mine. In fact, I certainly not even probably, certainly wouldn't try with a client of mine, but I was curious to kind of, experiment on myself. And that's always been a big part of my process, is not being afraid to experiment and play with things. I consider myself very evidence-based, very, science-backed. I do a lot of time and investment into learning the proper principles and, looking at research, but then also looking at kind of what some of the best coaches have done over time or athletes. So I like to take a very holistic approach. For myself, I do like to experiment with things. Let me try high protein, let me try low protein, let me try training 7 days a week, let me try training 2 days a week, like really experiencing the whole kind of spectrum, because I just find enjoyment in that. It's kind of treating myself as my own n=1 and seeing kind of what I learned from that. Like I really love that. And so I felt like coaching myself through this process would be the natural extension of that. Now, it is taking it to another extreme when you decide to kind of play with physiology and you're getting into these kind of critical levels. But it was something that I just felt like I wanted to experience for myself. I kind of tried to treat myself as a client, tracking all the things that I would ask a client to track, evaluating it, my data, so to speak. But I definitely learned a lot of lessons. Like for one, I learned that my natural predisposition is to push myself harder than I should, instead of, being a little bit too lackadaisical and needing to kind of, put a boot up my butt. And I'm the other way around, where actually my natural disposition is to be like, no, I need to push myself harder, harder, harder. That usually that's what I find that I'm doing with my bodybuilding athletes, is pulling them back and saving them from themselves.
Yeah.
So that was a major lesson that I learned, and probably the one that I'll be taking in next time. There's a lot of stuff that I learned about, how in stuff I want to do differently next time, like how to balance bodybuilding prep, which is a whole different, animal than, just like lifestyle kind of fitness or bodybuilding, and, social environment. And part of that, I think, was the job that I was working at the time. I was working a job with very demanding hours, kind of like the morning shift at a gym. So I was there at 4:15 every morning. I was having to go to bed at, 7 or 8, and, living with other people, living with my family. So there was a lot of challenges kind of built in there. But I would say I learned a lot from the process. And if it could be a lesson to anyone, I would say definitely get a coach. Meg is 100% right about that, because they will save you from themselves. And, it's not, like I said, it's not necessarily something that you want to play with. Maybe if you're considering trying to take yourself through the process, experiment in an environment that there's less kind of risk involved for sure. But I would say, the main benefit to a coach is being able to remain objective, and it's hard to do that with yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And it's interesting that you were able to coach yourself so successfully and kind of, get yourself to the stage and step on the stage and do the thing, because it's incredibly challenging and incredibly difficult. So that in and of itself is really cool. And then having that experience of, hey, I want to do this and I do want to coach myself, and I'm just going to figure it out as I go. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do the best I can, and we'll see what the outcome is. And then you learned so much from doing that. And like you said, it's making you a better coach as well, and probably a better athlete too. And like learning, I think it's a different learning process when you're coaching yourself versus when someone else is coaching you. And do you think for your next show, a few years from now, when you decide to compete again, do you think you would coach yourself again, or do you think you would hire someone at that point to lead you through that process?
Wow, that's a really good question, because it's something that I've thought about. Something I forgot to mention when I was talking about seeking out a coach initially was something that I struggle with is finding a coach who is vegan or based and who understands that nutrition component, and somebody who is also a prep coach and understands all of the nuances to the same extent and is on the same page as me. And I felt like, honestly, outside of probably Danny, there weren't many that I would have entrusted with my process who I felt understood both sides. And I'm not saying that you have to, like, there are a ton of vegan athletes who work with non-vegan coaches, and they can just do their own macros and do their own kind of meal plan. But I felt like I wanted somebody who kind of understood both sides. So if I was going to hire a coach, it probably would have been Danny, which is funny enough, because this was before I started working at Vegan Proteins. So I think part of it was feeling like I want to be one of those coaches, or that coach in the space, who's known for, you can go this person to get an evidence-based bodybuilding prep coach who also understands vegan nutrition and the ins and outs of that. And so I think that's part of the legacy that I would like to leave in the space, is kind of being that person and filling that gap and that need. And I actually have kind of a project that I'm working on behind the scenes that kind of relates to that. But I'm keeping that a little bit under wraps for now. But yeah, I think part of the reason that I was self-coach was for that reason. And so when I think about it in the future, I think that probably what I'll do is maybe have some kind of trusted people in my corner, so to speak, that I can kind of bounce ideas back on and kind of maybe consult with them, and still have some autonomy over my process, but really bring people in to kind of help keep me objective, especially at those kind of latter stages when my predisposition might be to push myself harder, saying, oh, what do you think I should do? And really kind of outsourcing my thought process there, and maybe hiring some people to kind of oversee my process, but maybe not, being so involved or entrenched in the day to day. Because I think that was really when I ran into issues in the latter stages. I think the first half, there's still some things that I would change, but I think I was able to do, a solid enough job with that. So I think maybe somewhat of a hybrid approach of like having some people that I consult with, but maybe not, completely giving over my process to somebody else but who knows, maybe in the future, like, I think there is something to be said about you can just like switch off your brain as an athlete and just focus on execution, as opposed to then constantly second guessing, oh, am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? And you kind of just get in your head, and that creates stress. And as we know, stress is kind of a major component of that recovery equation and being able to get the most out of your process.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because it's kind of choosing like what's the more difficult or more challenging option: to have a coach who's going to, give you the protocol so that you can shut off your brain, but then you don't have as much control potentially over your process depending on who your coach is and everything, versus, doing it on your own, and then you kind of lose that objectivity, and it's hard to sort of see yourself. And especially in those finishing, the couple weeks lead up to your show, I'm sure is sort of the most challenging to sort out on your own. And it'd be nice to have someone to bounce those things off of and get that feedback from someone else, for sure.
It's a matter of trade-offs, and it really just depends what you're trying to get out of the process, right? Like, if you care the most, like, if the thing that I cared about absolutely the most was just results and just purely like looking the best that I could on stage, I think it would be pretty unwise for me to think that I could, do the best job myself and I don't need anybody else to do that. But I also really value kind of that process of mulling things over in my brain, making a decision, learning from that, and kind of accepting the fact that, hey, I might not get the most optimal outcome here, but I really enjoy sometimes that, having autonomy over my process and being able to make those decisions for myself and do things in maybe a more unorthodox method, as long, of course, as long as I'm not making my process to the point where it's becoming detrimental, which maybe you could argue did happen. But I think at the end of the day, again, I don't really have too many regrets about how it went. Even if it wasn't the best result that I was looking for, I learned a lot from that. And usually the case is, as you continue to compete in bodybuilding over time, you learn something every single go, and it does get a little bit easier, not necessarily physically, but kind of mentally over time to kind of cope with it.
Yeah, I think even just the aspect of you've done it once, you've gone through that process once, and it's like you kind of know what to expect a little bit more. You kind of know where your body's headed, and if things don't seem to be coming together, but then they do come together, in this previous experience, you can kind of use that to for the next one and kind of reassure yourself, oh, like kind of trust the process more because you've been through it already.
Exactly. And I think that's usually what I'm doing when I'm working with someone is kind
Yeah,
of being like, if they haven't, gone through a prep before, it's like, oh, okay, this can be expected or this is reasonable at
exactly.
the certain time frame. So it's almost like, in the future, if I was to be self-coached again, I'm almost acting that way in myself. Like, oh, you've been here before, you kind of know what this is like. But I do think it is helpful to have people, you need a support system, regardless of if you're coaching yourself or you're working with a coach, you still need to have people around you that kind of understand and support that, because it is, nobody can, well, I mean, I guess you could, but it's really hard to kind of just lock yourself away for, 4, 5, 6 months, however long your prep is, and just do your own thing and not really, interact with the outside world. As much as sometimes people think it'll be easier to do it that way, I often find the ramifications afterwards. At least I noticed that with myself. You really have to kind of take account of the resources that you are putting into all areas of your life. And so if bodybuilding is taking all of those resources and you're not devoting anything to those social connections, sometimes it can be hard to recover that afterwards. And so I think oftentimes it is about just setting expectations, with those around you as well, and saying like, hey, I'm doing this thing for the next X amount of time, and this is what it's going to take, and this is what you could expect. And I hope that you'll be kind of supportive of me in this. And not every time is always the right time to enter a bodybuilding competition prep. Like if your life stress is super high and you got a bunch of other stuff going on, it's probably not the right time to really go for it. Not that there's ever necessarily a perfect time, but I think that's kind of another lesson I guess I would say is it was, I think, the right time for me to do it. And again, there have been a lot of positives that come out of it, but it's not always the right time to go ahead and execute that.
Yeah, and so with getting into bodybuilding and getting into competing specifically, how did you choose your division? And how do you, maybe we could run through some divisions and just kind of explain a little bit what the differences are, just for people in the audience who maybe aren't really familiar with bodybuilding? Because sometimes when you just say bodybuilding, there's just like, oh, bodybuilding. It's the people that get on the stage and they do the thing, and they're in almost no clothing with the tans and the makeup for women. The makeup and the jewelry and the hair and all that jazz. So I'd love to hear sort of the distinctions between different categories and how you personally decided to pick your division.
To give some kind of history or context, as I mentioned, there's natural bodybuilding and then there's untested bodybuilding. So in untested bodybuilding, they are not doing any sort of polygraph, which is something that most natural bodybuilding organizations do. Polygraph, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a quote unquote lie detector test. So they hook you up to this thing, they ask you some questions, have you taken any performance enhancing drugs, that sort of thing. It's usually more of a deterrent than anything else to keep people away from competing who maybe would try to abuse that system. And then there is urinalysis, or sometimes blood analysis for the winners of certain divisions for different federations. And so something that's a little bit confusing is that, let's just take natural bodybuilding. Within natural bodybuilding, there are lots of different federations, and each
For sure.
federation might have their own rules or divisions, and there's slightly different criteria and slightly different suits and posing and everything. So I'm gonna speak in broad kind of generalities here. So for bodybuilding, there are, I'll just talk about natural bodybuilding here. There are usually a couple different men's and women's divisions that you could expect to see. So for the men, there's usually just bodybuilding, just men's bodybuilding, and what that is it's the leanest, it's the most muscular, but usually across all divisions, you're looking at a couple different criteria. So how lean someone is, so how much body fat you carry, that's often called like conditioning. That's a bodybuilding term for that. And so men's bodybuilding is the most extreme of that. So as lean as you can be, pretty much. And then different divisions have different requirements. So then from there, there's also like classic physique and men's physique, and those are two other kind of common male divisions. So men's bodybuilding, you wear like the banana boat, the Speedo, the little trunks, so you can see as much as possible, and you're trying to be as muscular as you can and as lean as you can, and symmetrical and as proportional as you can. And what that means is, your lower body and your upper body kind of match in terms of muscularity. So you don't have a huge upper body, but no lower body, and vice versa. And then also, usually there's not really huge differences in symmetry left to right. You might have some sort of imbalances where one muscle group is a little bit bigger than the other, but usually we're talking about kind of top to bottom matching here. Classic physique is kind of the same thing, but it's meant to be kind of like an homage to the classic era of bodybuilding. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, you think about pumping iron, and so it's not quite the most revealing trunks. It's kind of more like, I get boxer briefs, I guess, would be kind of like an analogy there. And you don't have to be quite as lean, but there's more of an emphasis on like the aesthetics and the symmetry and really having this nice V taper. So that's a big thing in bodybuilding as well, as kind of the art of illusion. So you want to try to make your waist as small as possible, and like wide shoulders and a wide back, and kind of that hourglass figure, for women, and for males too, really, when you think about it, that kind of taper. And that's, I don't know if it's like the the Grecan ideal or whatever, but it was just this, this idea of creating this kind of X frame, this shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can apply a little bit differently to divisions. So that's classic physique, and there's a big emphasis on posing and the art of bodybuilding. So I really like that division. That's a cool division. And then there's men's physique, where you kind of cover up your legs. They wear these like shorts, and it's just kind of upper body poses and not as much flexing stuff, more kind of like beach body sort of thing. And then for the women's divisions, there is bikini, there's figure, there's wellness, there's women's bodybuilding. I feel and there's women's physique. And so these again, each federation has slightly different things, but usually, conditioning goes from, quote unquote, like softer or less lean conditions. Bikini, I guess wellness would kind of be in there, figure, physique, bodybuilding. And then like muscularity kind of scales that way as well. Bikini is almost like kind of like, imagine beauty pageant with muscle. That could be like a good way to put it, where there's more of an emphasis on the pageantry. So the hair, the makeup, the suit, the matching, the way that you display yourself on stage, the posing is a huge kind of, and the presentation is a huge component of bikini. And then you kind of move to wellness, which is kind of similar to bikini, but more muscular in the lower body. And then there's figure, which is more of kind of that classic X frame, where you're having, those kind of capped delts, the wide V taper of, your back, more emphasis on the lower body being more muscular as well, and a little bit leaner. And then women's physique and bodybuilding, again, are kind of like further down that line, where even leaner, even more muscular, still focus on kind of the symmetry, and there's different poses that you hit. So they might hit more like flexing poses. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into the process. It's kind of a weird sport, as you mentioned, with the tanning and the getting on stage, and it's there is a certain degree, I think, of camaraderie in that too, and it's cool. It's cool going to a competition. So if you know anyone that does bodybuilding, or is interested in it, I would always say check out the shows that are local to you. Maybe go and watch one, see what it's about. I know that you did that recently, Meg. You went to a show, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious for you to kind of just touch on what your experience with that was. But I think it's, even if you go there and you're like, hey, that looks cool. Not really for me. I think everyone can appreciate the amount of time and effort and dedication that goes into anyone who decides to get up on the bodybuilding stage and puts themselves out there quite literally for the world to see. So I think that there is that when you're backstage with the other competitors, like, hey, everyone here put a lot of effort in to be here and to make it to this competition. And so there's a lot of mutual respect that goes around with that.
Yeah. So do you think thanks so much for giving all that background about all the divisions, because it can be complicated for people who aren't as familiar with the sport, and there's more involved, right? There's more different categories and different sections than maybe people realize. So that's really helpful for sure for the audience. And so when you're picking a division, like when you're getting into bodybuilding, you're a newbie and you want to compete, how do you actually pick your division? Like for me, I was sort of looking at like different shapes, I guess, or sizes of humans, right? So like when I looked at knocked my microphone there. When I looked at the bikini competitors, for example, I noticed that they tend to be sort of smaller framed, like smaller built humans generally. And so I thought maybe I'm a little big for that category. And then in looking at wellness, originally I was like, oh, I'd fit wellness. I have a big booty. But then it's like, wait, hold up. It's not about just having a big ass. It's about having a muscular, well-defined lower body. And figure always really appealed to me because it's very balanced, and I love training upper body. So it kind of, not just the aesthetic of it, but the way that I like to train. I was like, oh, figure might be a good fit. But then with physique, they don't wear heels. And I'm like, that's appealing to not have to wear heels. And they also do a little, what do you call it? Like a routine. So I was like, that's kind of interesting because I have a dance background and I'm like, it's almost like a little performance. That's kind of cool. So how do you recommend people, I guess, choose a category, or do they not even choose until sort of you're practically going to enter a competition and then you pick for your first show?
Question. And I realized I didn't even answer your question about what
About
division
you,
I
yeah.
picked for myself and which one
Yeah.
I got into. So I ended up competing in just regular bodybuilding because, again, I kind of have a little bit of an extreme personality. So I'm like, no, I want to get as lean as I can get and see what I can do. And I actually, the first time you enter a competition, you can do first timers, you can do novice, which is essentially like first time competing. Novice is you haven't placed in a category yet. And I just went straight into the open. So like competing against everyone, because I'm like, I want to compete with the best of the best. I want to see where I stack up. And I did, I did pretty well in my first show. I placed second out of 7. So I was just 1 out of, qualifying to get a pro card in this federation. But the way that I decided was, yeah, just like I wanted to do that. But actually next time around, I think what I'm going to do is compete in classic physique because I really like the kind of aesthetic and the posing aspect of it. I like the trunks, and I also realize that certain muscle groups for me tend to lean out earlier, sooner than other ones, and so competitively I might have my best physique if I'm not as lean, because I won't, sometimes what happens is, for me, my upper body got lean first. This is a pretty common thing, but your upper body gets lean first. Your lower body, you have to lose more to get into proper bodybuilding, again, conditioning, quote unquote. But I found that in order to do that, I had to kind of sacrifice some size in my upper body in order to get that lean. So next time around, maybe what I'll do is not get as lean in that, therefore I don't have to sacrifice muscle in other places in order to lose the body fat. So it is kind of this art of like figuring out like, okay, is this kind of trade-off worth it of losing size here by getting a little bit leaner? So that's something that you can consider when you consider what division you decide to compete in, is what muscle groups or what body parts really stand out for me. So if you have certain muscle groups or body parts that kind of naturally, you mentioned frame, fit a certain category or division or criteria, and you like that category or criteria, I think that's important as well. Like even if you fit a category, if you're not going to enjoy competing in that category, don't do it. Like if you feel like oh, I would do super well in bikini, but you just don't like the idea of bikini, you're like, no, I want to hit like the flexing poses, I want to really be up there and kind of like do my thing. Okay, go ahead and compete in physique, compete in bodybuilding, even if you're not going to be as competitive. Like, hey, you're doing what you enjoy. So there's that component to it. Really decide that, hey, am I trying to be the most competitive I can be, or am I just trying to enjoy the process, or maybe some balance of the two of those? And okay, if I want to be the most competitive, am I willing to alter my training to fit a certain category? If you really enjoy training upper body and lower body, but you want to compete in wellness, like, okay, maybe you would have to devote pretty much all of your training to lower body with a little bit of upper body, but maybe you don't enjoy training that way. So that's probably not worth it to, completely overhaul your training just to fit a category. So I would say, consider the training style that you enjoy. And then just understand you can change over time. So maybe you start out in bikini or wellness, but over time you decide as you build more muscle and you go along your journey, hey, I want to compete in figure, or I want to compete in physique and bodybuilding. So you can always decide to compete. And then I would say you probably want to pick the division that you're going to compete in a good maybe like 8 or 12 weeks out from your show. So you can practice your posing, you can get your suit in time because your suit is going to change depending on the division that you compete in, and really feel like you are confident going into it. So there's a lot of factors that can go into it, and that's why I think if you're kind of unsure, but you're interested, maybe just you don't necessarily have to hire a coach, but maybe have a consultation with somebody who is a coach who can help you figure these things out. So you're not kind of like wondering about, oh, should I do this or should I do that? I think it could be helpful to kind of have somebody who can, weigh the pros and cons for you and help you make that decision.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's good. It's interesting to think about, there's the sort of aesthetic side of it and like the size and shape generally sort of side of it. But then there's also the training aspect, and like you're going to have to do the work and put in the time and do the training to get on stage, right? It's not like you magically just snap your fingers and jump on stage and I'm going to be a wellness girly. Here I go, right? You have to put in the work and put in the time. And so for someone like me, who I love upper body, it's my favorite. Leg day, I'm like, meh, like I'll do it. It's fine, but it's not my favorite. So, for me to jump into wellness probably doesn't make sense because I'd have to do like 3 leg days a week and, not focus on my upper body. Whereas when I'm doing upper body, I'm like, yeah, like I feel amazing. I feel strong and powerful. And I think it's because I used my legs a lot more, which sounds weird, but like playing soccer as a kid, dancing as a kid, doing gymnastics, the arms were just kind of like the frame for like the dancing or the gymnastics or the whatever, and not as like focused on being strong, whereas like my legs are crazy strong already. So yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of think of the training aspect of it as well as the aesthetic side of it.
And that's, bodybuilding, like it's in the name too,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's contest prep and getting ready for a show really is about losing body fat while trying to just keep your muscle. But really, a bodybuilding athlete spends most of their time building and trying to, as I mentioned, going back to the analogy, like add bits of clay in the places that they want to. So if you're going to be spending most of your time building, you're going to want to enjoy that. And if you are constantly feeling like, hey, I have to train this certain way for this certain division because I feel like with my frame, I'm going to be the most competitive here, it's probably not going to be a sustainable process. So I think everyone is going to be a little bit different and really thinking about what is going to be the most longevity promoting while still balancing whatever competitive aspirations you have. But it's also okay to not really have competitive aspirations and to want to compete just to see, can I do it? And to gain a lot of self-efficacy and just kind of see what you learn about yourself through that process of really pushing your limits, and doing something that you've never done before. And I feel like as long as you have someone in your corner who can guide you through that process, it can be really transformative. And I've seen that with a lot of folks. So I don't know, maybe that would be a good segue into like talking about, yourself and what really sparked your interest in maybe getting into to bodybuilding and working towards competing on the stage.
Sure, yeah. So I'll just touch on before you were mentioning about me going to see a show and kind of my experience with that. And so I'll touch on that quickly first and then jump into sort of my getting into bodybuilding. But so I went to a show a few weeks ago, and I've only seen one other show live, and it was for a friend of mine. So the first show I went to, it was just for a friend. She was competing. I was like, yay, good job, girl. Awesome. Like, thumbs up, amazing. I could never do that. I could never be a bodybuilder. Like, holy crap, the amount of discipline, the amount of time and energy, and like, that's wild. Like, that's just so intense and so extreme. Like that's not something I could ever do. But in watching that first show, I also kind of had it in the back of my mind, like, could I do that? For some reason it appealed to me. For some reason it was kind of interesting, and it kind of existed in the back of my head for a couple of years. And then a few weeks ago, I went to this next show to just scope it out and see what it was about. And obviously, I have already hired a coach, and I'm already kind of in the bodybuilding realm. But watching that show from a different perspective and with different eyes and through a different lens of like, oh, like, could I actually do that thing and step on that stage in a year or in 2 years or however the timing works out, and kind of looking at the different categories and like more specifically looking at like different features, and just it's a different way of looking at it when you're just a spectator just for a buddy versus like, oh, that could potentially be me in imminently, you know, in the next year or two. And that was really fascinating to look at it from that different perspective and see what it was all about. For my bodybuilding journey, I started strength training back 2019, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and I hired a trainer. I had been in the gym environment. I was a fitness instructor. I was a dance instructor, but I had never really trained on the gym floor, and I was really afraid of that. So I hired a trainer. I was like, I don't want to get injured. I don't want to like mess anything up. I want to know what I'm doing. I want to feel confident and feel like I know what's up. So safety first. I hired a trainer, and that went really well. Obviously, the pandemic happened, so that threw a wrench into things. But I have been training on and off, strength training on and off since that time. I also had a bunch of health issues last year where I took a year off because I had a massive endometriosis flare up and had to have surgery. And so I was out of the gym for a full year. So I have been training, you know, on and off since 2020. And I decided this year, I'm turning 40 this year, and I was like, it'd be really cool to mark something with my 40th year. What am I going to do? What am I passionate about? What am I interested in right now? And what do I want to do kind of moving forward? And I thought a photo shoot would be really interesting and cool. So I thought, you know, I'll schedule that for in and around my birthday. Also, maybe I could give this bodybuilding thing a go, because I won't know unless I try. I won't know unless I kind of go through the steps and go through the motions and try to do it. And it's something that I've been interested in for a while, and I've had a lot of self-doubt and a lot of like, could I actually do that? So I think getting into that mindset of, I could do it. Like if I look at any other human and they say they want to do something, I'm like, cool, go for it. You could do that. But when it comes to myself, it's like, ooh, could I? Could I actually do the thing? So I decided, hey, I want to give this a go. I really want to give this a good try. I'll hire someone so that I have, you know, someone who can get to know me now, help me prep for this photo shoot coming up, and then will know me and how I work and everything moving into potentially prepping for a show in the next year or beyond, if depending on how the timing works.
So interesting that you mentioned looking at other people doing kind of something that you might aspire to do versus yourself, and just
Yeah.
considering like, hey, you know, like it's cool, you know, other people like awesome for them, but like, you know, that could never. And also like hearing you say that you thought that way years ago when you went to your friend's show, and now going to a show and kind of viewing it from another perspective of like, ooh, could that be me up there like doing that thing? I remember the first show that I went to and really just being like blown away by the kind of the physiques that I saw up there, and being like, oh, it's hard to imagine myself really getting up there and doing that thing. But I think that your first bodybuilding show is probably something where you're going to have those feelings until you actually do the thing. Like you're always kind of going to wonder, like, you know, could I do it? And you know, I've just seen over time so many people who go through that process where they don't really have maybe, you know, the a massive overflowing amount of self-belief in terms of their bodybuilding process at the start, but then they do make it to the end, and you know, regardless of the result of it, they're, you know, super proud of the fact that they endured and they made it there, because a lot of people will go through the process and maybe don't make it there, or they just have that self-doubt and they never decide to kind of take the leap. So I think that it's something where, yeah, you're probably not really ever going to feel 100% confident until you kind of just like commit and do the thing, and that can be really scary at times. So I think that you know, it's about creating the proper support system, like I mentioned earlier, like hiring a coach and, informing the people in your life about it. And you try to do your best to set yourself up for success. And then you know that there's going to be certain things that are going to be hard. Like, we talked about this on the podcast that we did with Danny for vegan proteins the other day. But really, like, kind of that informed consent piece, like, you're never really going to know what it's like to experience those things, but you try to, like, prepare yourself as best you can, and then you go and you do the thing. So I'd be curious to know, like, since we kind of started together, what have been some maybe like takeaways or, things that you're finding out of the process? Maybe how is it different than what you've done before on your own in the past? And then has your kind of view or attitude towards bodybuilding changed since we kind of started?
Yeah, it's really interesting because prior to all of this, I went vegan back in 2016, and I ended up losing 80 pounds, and I did it completely by myself. I had no coach. Looking back on it, maybe it would have been nice to have a coach and have someone guide me through the process. But at the time, I was a new mom. I was very busy, and I just did it on my own. And I completely changed my diet. I switched to a whole food plant-based diet predominantly, and that's how I lost the weight. And I was going from a fairly highly processed standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet. So I dropped weight, and I dropped weight, fairly quickly, I would say. And I had, some health issues along the way as well. And a lot of my health issues were cleared up from going whole food plant-based and from eating a vegan diet, eating a healthful vegan diet. And, I had chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and they just were gone. Yay. And my asthma and my endometriosis improved. And so my initial sort of entry point, I think, into fitness and these kinds of things was very health based. And prior to that, I had been on weight loss journeys. I had, before pictures that stayed before pictures. So, or like, I'd lose a little bit of weight just really temporarily for like a vacation, and then go on the vacation, eat all the food, and regain the weight, right? So I think in coming to it from a health perspective and through my weight loss journey, like we talked about in the podcast episode, really working on my body image and my self-image and really loving myself through that process, and then now being on the other end of it and venturing into bodybuilding, I still want to maintain that love for my body and love for myself, and kind of enjoying the process too, and appreciating all the different phases that my body goes through. So whether I'm, right now I'm in a fat loss phase and I'm leaning out, and I'm doing my best to enjoy that, and trying different forms of cardio and seeing what feels good, what doesn't, what works, what doesn't. And when I get into a bulking phase at some point, because I see this as a long term, it's the long game, right? It's not just like a little tiny sliver of time. It's a long term situation. So when I get into a bulking phase, I want to be really happy with getting into a bulk and like, okay, cool, I will gain some fat along with that muscle. That is just part of the process. I accept that as part of the process, and not feel like my worth is connected to it, or like if I gain weight, it's the end of the world, because it's for a specific purpose and for the sake of the sport.
I think that it's always, in my view, a choice to view the different aspects of any process. So for instance, you can decide that you want to lose some weight, and you can focus on the fact that sometimes you feel hungry, or you're tired, or you're worn down, and it's really easy, at least for myself, I experienced this at the extreme during my kind of competition prep, where it was really easy to get kind of bogged down in the negatives. But something that I tried to remind myself the whole time is that this is a choice. Like, you have the the privilege to be able to decide to do this, to manipulate your body composition at will, and you're choosing to do this for a purpose, to step on the bodybuilding stage. And so really just viewing it as like, hey, this is a challenge. It's fun to challenge myself. Of course, it's not always going to be fun every time, when you're doing your cardio or you got to go out for some steps, or, maybe you go to bed a little bit hungry. Like, it's not always the most, I guess, enjoyable thing all the time, but realize that you're doing it for a purpose, and like that self-actualization that you get from at the end of the process, looking back and feeling like, wow, I really did that thing. And also realizing that there's certain ways that you can enjoy the process more by, I'm really big on focusing on the positive aspects of every phase. So if you're in a fat loss phase, maybe you're feeling a little bit lighter on your feet, you're moving around a little bit easier. Maybe you like the way that a certain muscle is kind of popping out, really trying to lean into focusing on those aspects. And then maybe when you're in a build, instead of being as so focused in how your body's looking all the time, you get to lean into the parts of like, I've got a little bit more like flexibility with food socially. I'm really, seeing some awesome strength increases in the gym, and really just trying to find a way to make whatever you're doing more enjoyable. And I think that you can do that no matter what phase you're in. And it sounds like that's something that you're kind of, playing around with or experimenting, and like, hey, how can I find a way to look at this and still pursue this in a way that feels rewarding, even though it is challenging at times?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting that there's so many different components of bodybuilding. Sometimes when people talk about bodybuilding or think about it, you just think about the end result on stage, and it's that one day and then done and gone and whatever. But it really is this lifestyle, and your training, your nutrition, your mental health, your cardio, your steps, like all these different things that go into it. And it is a long-term process. It's not something that you can just, I want muscles and I'm going to go stand on a bodybuilding stage tomorrow. Like, that's not how it works, right? So I think it's been really drilled into me, like, because when I decided I wanted to get into this, I go into research mode, listen to all the podcasts, try to read all the books, get all the information. I obviously try to get a ton of information from you as well, and support and things like that. So it's been interesting to gather all that information. And kind of one of the bottom line, like, biggest things is that it takes time to build muscle. It's not something that's just gonna magically appear. You have to work for it, and it's going to be something that takes time. But because I enjoy it so much, it doesn't feel like that hard, really. And I know there will be phases where it does feel more difficult. And I think the more prepared I can be, and the more prepared people can be generally getting into the sport and knowing as much as possible getting into it, then the more you can kind of enjoy the different phases of it, because you kind of know what to expect to a certain degree. I think prep in and of itself is very hard to conceptualize and hard to understand what it would be like unless you're in it, because it's so specific. But I think generally, like, recreational bodybuilding lifestyle is a bit more easy to understand. And even for someone who doesn't necessarily want to step on stage, it can be a really nice lifestyle to just, build some muscle and take your time doing that and really do the work, and then, lose some fat and kind of see what is going on with your body and how much muscle you have built, and kind of uncover and do the sculpting and do the experiments.
I think the one thing about bodybuilding that is kind of nice is like that you always kind of feel like you're working towards something. So like if you're in a build, that's a goal. If you're in a fat loss, that's a goal. Of course, there's time for just like maintenance phases and kind of just living your life. And I think sometimes, I've heard from people it can get, if they're in a maintenance phase for too long, or they're kind of just like, they've got the habits down and they're kind of just doing the thing, and letting the results kind of accumulate over time, it can get a little bit stale for folks. So I almost think sometimes it helps kind of keep that excitement going a little bit. But like you said, really, the process of body recomposition at whatever level you're doing that, whether you're just getting into it and just getting started on your journey, or you're trying to get to the stage, it is kind of, like you said, it's really just about being consistent with a certain degree of effort over time. And it's not really that exciting. It can be kind of boring. And so often in my check-ins with you or with other, athletes or people that I coach, sometimes it's pretty simple. It's like, okay, you're doing all the right things. We kind of just need to, keep doing that over time. And if there's any way that we can refine our process to make it more, efficient, or really kind of, dial this in over here or over there, like, we'll do those things. But often I'm not really making kind of any major adjustments. If we set things up properly, it's oftentimes just like, maybe discussing some mindset stuff, or talking talking about maybe like a topic that's of note to someone, but oftentimes my check-ins are like, hey, you're doing all the right things. We just want to keep doing this week after week after week. And it can, you got to have a degree of patience with that. Trusting the process also means that that process needs to be sound. You don't want to just trust something if you don't know that it's working. But if you set things up properly, sometimes it is kind of like investing where you got to show up every day instead of, viewing, like if we, extend this analogy, you're putting in a dollar into the bank every single day. It's kind of like that when you go to the gym, like you're putting a penny in your kind of like physique bank, so to speak. And over time that's going to accumulate, but you have to really give it time to let it accumulate. And that can be the hardest part for people, is just giving it enough time with enough effort, doing things the right way to kind of reap the rewards of that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to consider that it is a long-term situation. If you want to get into bodybuilding and get into competing, it is, you do have to put in the time and the energy and the effort. And like you said, with your clients and the way that your check-ins typically go, it's kind of similar with me with my clients too. Like, I don't work with athletes specifically or bodybuilders specifically, but even working with lifestyle clients, it's like, oh, hey, how did your week go? What's going on? Oh, you did all the things? Check, check, check. Awesome. Let's keep going. Let's continue to make this progress. Let's be consistent. And if for whatever reason something has gone awry, oh, okay, let's dig into that a little bit. Let's troubleshoot. Let's try to find some solutions. What could you maybe do differently the next time, and things like that. And I think sometimes getting into the coaching relationship, I had a good sense getting into it with vegan proteins that it would be a good experience, and that, I would learn a lot and it would be helpful to me. But at the same time, I thought it would be a little more intense. Like, I thought it'd be a little more like top down and a little more hardcore, because I'm like, I'm getting into athlete mode now. So it's going to be like a new world. But it's kind of the same. It's kind of the repetitive, like, just keep putting in the energy and keep putting in the time and keep putting in the work, and you reap the rewards as you go. You see the progress as you go and as time goes on. So I found that to be really interesting, because I did have this concept that what I do is like over here and what you do is over here, but there's a lot more overlap and a lot more that is very, very similar in the way that we approach coaching.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago or maybe a couple months ago where we had this conversation about like what really separates somebody who's more like lifestyle versus kind of competitive bodybuilder. And I think to a certain extent it's adherence and making sure that you're kind of maybe like if someone who's lifestyle, they get the results that they want from 75 to 80% of adherence. Now when you're a competitive bodybuilder, maybe you turn that dial up to more like 90 or 95, and it ebbs and flows at times, whatever phase you're in. But I think that's often what it is. And then also there can be things like programming, like somebody who's goes to the gym to work out, but it's kind of just more for general health. Okay, maybe we're looking at more 2-3 times a week versus like 4 or 5 times a week for somebody who's really trying to push those physique goals competitively. And there can be stuff that comes in like program design for their division, like we talked about. But yeah, I think there is this perception with bodybuilding that it has to be this super like extreme hardcore thing. And I think a lot of bodybuilders just give off that persona. I do see it for whatever reason more, I think, in the untested realm than maybe like the natural realm, because maybe there's just a little bit more division or separation there. I mean, when you think about the physiques, you are taking it to a more extreme level in terms of the things that you're doing to your body and the level of leanness and the level of muscularity. Not to say that in natural bodybuilding you can't get as lean, you certainly can't get as muscular, but I think it's just kind of a different level there. But I think that there is definitely a way to make bodybuilding fit within the context of your life, and it doesn't have to be this thing that's all consuming. And I think that maybe is one of kind of the misconceptions. Like, if I'm talking to somebody and I say that I'm a bodybuilder, they might expect that I'm looking like lean and shredded like year round. I think that's another common kind of misconception, or that I'm always kind of like I'm my diet it's strict 100% all the time. I'm never going out to eat. I'm always eating the same things all the time. It's like super intense, like you said. And I think that just burns people out, to be honest. And it prevents you from being taking this long-term view, like you mentioned, of really kind of just like letting it accumulate over time. So oftentimes when I'm working with people, it's more so to kind of save them from themselves, like I mentioned with myself at the start, where I'm really just managing fatigue and making sure that they're not like, pushing themselves too hard and pulling them back, and setting up their training program and their diet and all of that properly. Of course, that's a component of it, but when we're thinking about like the week to week stuff, it is often, like you said, kind of just like that encouragement and being there if something comes up. And that's huge, right? Like as an athlete, knowing that, hey, even if I'm doing the right things, if something comes up, this person has my back. I think there's a lot of assurance in that.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. It's interesting how when you are focusing on your health and kind of doing the lifestyle thing and you're feeling good, and then you decide that you want to embark into athletics. And for someone like me who hasn't really been in an athletic realm before either, and that is kind of unfamiliar to me, I would say. You know, I think that sort of there's different expectations maybe, or perceptions about what bodybuilding is, or about who bodybuilders are, and like, oh hey, they're super confident all the time, and you start to talk to them and you realize, oh no, they're not like, they have body image issues, they have problems like everybody else, right? So I think sometimes in looking at someone else, and this happens a lot on social media, but also in real life, like looking at someone else and thinking, oh, like their physique is perfect, they look amazing. You see the highlight reel and you think their life must just be wonderful and perfect, and that they never have any self-doubt, or they never have any qualms about anything. And then you start talking to people and it's like, oh hey, we're all humans. Like we all have these different thoughts and different perceptions, and body image issues, and different ideas. And I think it's interesting to note that, because from an outsider perspective, they might not really, if you don't engage with bodybuilders, you might just see like the shiny stuff on Instagram or whatever, and not really know that they're humans doing the human thing, and they have a pursuit, and they have a determination and a dedication. But I think a lot more people could do that if they had the inner belief that they could do it. Like if they sort of trusted themselves, if they wanted to do it, and they had that inner belief and trust in themselves that they could do it, they could actually get to that phase as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think so. I think most people, like you said, if they really wanted to and wanted to set their mind to it, they could, you know, get whatever they wanted to or needed to out of that process. It's not for everyone, like you said, and I think most people just probably just don't think about their bodies that much, or care. And I think most people are down for like the health side of things and like wanting to live a long, healthy life. But I think it is something that is accessible to a lot of people, and I think that that's a really cool part about bodybuilding, is you don't really need much other than like a gym membership, and everyone's got to eat anyways, so you can kind of bodybuild on your own and get a lot out of that process. Now, competing is its own thing, because there's
For
costs
sure.
involved with the show itself when it comes to the suit and the hotel and the travel and all of that. But I think just like on a base level, like the pursuit of bodybuilding is something that a lot of people can get behind and can find kind of camaraderie. And so I think that it is, wherever you are at along that process, whether you're kind of just getting started, or you want to compete, you want to be a bodybuilder, everyone can kind of get behind the idea of, hey, maybe I want to look a little bit better, get a little bit healthier, and then how much you want to take that is just kind of like a dial that you can turn up or turn down, and it looks a little bit different in terms of your habits and what you're willing to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think competing is kind of its own little realm and its own special sort of thing. And it is an extreme sport. It gets to a point where it's not healthy, and that those last few weeks of prep, you're doing some crazy things to get to where you need to go to step on stage, and that's a bit of a different circumstance, and you're doing it specifically, ideally you're doing it specifically for the sport, and you're not doing it in a way that is going to be so detrimental to your health that you're going to have a hard time, really difficult time recovering. But there is that time involved in post show as well, to kind of come back and to recover and get back to sort of homeostasis, I guess, kind of back to that stability. But I think for people who are kind of afraid to lift weights, or afraid to get into strength training, or afraid to get into bodybuilding, it's like, you can do it. I can do it. You can do it, you know? And I think more people probably should lift weights. And, you know, as we get older, we're losing muscle mass. And it doesn't mean you have to be like super huge and aim to be like super muscular and like super massive if that's not something you want. But just in terms of general health, I think strength training and getting into bodybuilding can be really healthy in terms of the lifestyle aspect of it. Not so much the competing end necessarily, but I think also in competing, there can be a way to do that in a way. My goal is to do it in a way that is as healthy as possible for as long as possible until such time when you just kind of, you know, you have that short bit of time. Hopefully it's as short as possible that you're maybe doing some weird stuff that you wouldn't normally do just in order to step on stage and bring the best package that you can. But I think people sell themselves short a little bit with stepping into gyms or stepping into the weight room. And I just want to encourage people who are listening who maybe are at the beginning phases of kind of getting into this that they can do it and they can enjoy it and have fun with it.
And I think it's also an interesting thought experiment to consider that most people who do end up competing at bodybuilding, again, the most extreme application of, you know, lifting weights and doing all these healthy habits, most of them probably didn't, you know, intend to start out that way. Like most of them kind of just stepped into the gym and you know, hey, let's see what happens. Maybe, you know, you were doing it for your health or doing it, you know, a lot of young men, maybe it's to, you know, become more attractive or whatever it is. You might have a variety of reasons to get into going to the gym, and that can change and that can evolve over time. But I think I'm seeing it more and more where gyms are becoming a welcoming space for everyone to go. And of course, you know, it's not perfect, but like you said, if it seems intimidating, everyone starts from square one and starts kind of not really knowing anything, and you don't need to even necessarily know exactly where you're going with it. You know, you don't have to have this grand plan. You can just get started, and it can look really simple, and you don't have to even necessarily like quote unquote know what you're doing. You can just go in and explore and make it kind of something that doesn't have to feel stressful or you know, intimidating to the extent that you can make it that. And then hey, over time you try to learn a little bit more and, you know, pick up things here and there, and you can make it your own. You can make it your own.
Yeah, and another thought that I had when you were talking about that is when you know, people decide to be a bodybuilder and to maybe do it competitively. I think oftentimes when you talk to them, they'll say, "I never thought I would be a bodybuilder." You know, I never thought I would do that, right? So I think everyone kind of has that common starting point. I think it's rare to find someone who's like, "Oh yeah, I always wanted to be a bodybuilder. I knew it was what I wanted to do." Like it's usually not that kind of a sport or not that kind of a thing. So I think that's also an interesting aspect and something to think about for people who are interested in getting into it, because anyone who's doing it, most of the time they're going to say like, I never thought I'd step on a bodybuilding stage. I never thought I'd compete in bodybuilding, right? And everyone has different entry points into it. But I think that in and of itself is kind of interesting. And it kind of is similar to going vegan too, in a way, right? Like oftentimes when you speak to people who are vegan, they haven't always been vegan. And oftentimes they'll say, like, I never thought I would go vegan ever.
They started maybe because they were interested in one aspect, whether that be like their health or
Yeah.
the environment or, you know, the animals. And then over time, you learn about the other aspects and you kind of ingrain that into your personality, and it changes and evolves over time. So I think that's a great analogy. And I think it could maybe a place to kind of wrap things up would be to talk about what you are hoping to do with your own bodybuilding over the next you know, couple years, and, you know, maybe some goals of yours, and just how you're feeling about it at this current moment.
Yeah, I think at this current moment, I'm feeling really good with it. I've had some travel experiences that always are a little bit interesting because it's like, how do I make this work while I'm traveling? How do I fit in training? How do I, you know, do this and that? But it's like anything else. It's like flexing any muscle. Like the more you practice, you know, the better you get at it and the stronger you get with doing those things. So right now, like I'm feeling really good. I am going to be scheduling a photo shoot for the next, you know, month or 6 weeks from now, give or take. So I'm excited for that. It'll be, yay, I'm turning 40. This is what 40 looks like for Meg. So that'll be fun. And yeah, I'm feeling positive about bodybuilding. I think it's a really interesting and really strange sport. And I'm excited to see what I can do. I think I'm really just kind of trying to run the experiment and stay curious and continue to learn, continue to grow. And like we've been talking about, just being consistent, keep putting in the time, keep doing the things that I know I need to do. And then if things come up, obviously, I have you, I have a wonderful coach to go to say, hey, this thing came up. What do I do? Right. So I'm feeling good about it, feeling positive about it. I'm curious about your thoughts in terms of my timeline, because I've thrown around like, oh, maybe next year, or maybe it won't be until, you know, the following year. I don't know. And maybe I'm not lean enough to tell yet, but I'm curious what your thoughts are about my timeline generally, and how people in general can kind of make that decision of when to compete and when is a good time to sort of get into prep mode and get into gearing up for a competition.
Yeah, I think just to touch on briefly what you talk about with travel, I think one of the reasons why it's helpful to have a time, either that you're working with a coach or just having a time to build those habits before you go into something like a prep, is because you've had the time to really navigate those situations and figure out how to kind of work around that before you enter that more time-based, or that more pressurized setting. And so you can say, I've practiced this 10, 15, 20, however many times, and so I know how to navigate that situation. And so I think it's good that it's coming up now, because we can figure out kind of a system that works, and then be able to rely on that in the future. And I think with timelines, it's something where when I first started getting into coaching, this applies to myself or, clients that I work with, I was a lot more like, hey, we're going to plan things out exactly. Like, we're going to go through this phase, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And I've gotten a lot, I'd say, more fluid with it over time, and saying like, hey, I think this is the phase that makes this most sense for where we are right now. This is maybe an approximate timeline of what I could see, give or take, depending on, how things are going. And okay, after this phase is over, let's have a conversation about what are we going to do next. And when that phase is over is probably going to be predicated on a couple different things. So to give an example, so it's a little bit more concrete, maybe we decide we're going to go through a fat loss phase, and we could have a goal weight in mind, and we could have a time frame in which we're trying to get there. But I think it's oftentimes what I'll do is, hey, let's just start this phase, set it up at a reasonable, in a reasonable approach, see if we're content with the rate of progress. And if we're not, we can kind of dial things up and continue to dial things up until we are happy with that rate of progress. And if we keep trying to, push that dial up, and the progress is coming, great. If it gets to a point where progress is kind of slowing down, and we also feel like we're getting burnt out of that, continually pushing, that's probably a sign that it makes sense to take a break. And so we take a break and we decide, are we going to go into a build from here? Are we going to hang out at maintenance, and kind of like, reset so that we can go again into a fat loss phase? And so there's a lot of, I think, kind of give and take and back and forth in ways that you can do it. So when I think about you and kind of your timeline, it's not, I think that if you wanted to compete next year, you certainly could. And I think we could, decide, okay, this is how that's going to look. But I think oftentimes taking the pressure off of a certain date or a certain timeline or a certain show, like, yeah, there are people who come to me who say, I'm doing this show in 16 weeks, get me ready. And it's like, okay, you got to just do the most that you can with that. But if I have somebody who is a little bit more flexible, of course, sometimes it can help to set that long-term goal so they feel like they're working towards something concrete. But oftentimes I think having enough broad kind of ranges around that, like, hey, these are some shows that I'm considering about, but it doesn't really matter if I do it in 2026 or 2027. Like, either of those are fine to me. And I talked about earlier, like prepping at the right time, life circumstances often are really going to play into that. If it's a really high stress time, you got a lot of like family or, social stuff going on, maybe work is really busy, probably not the best time to go right into a prep. But if things feel like, kind of status quo, of course you might be busy, but that's not always a bad thing. Okay, maybe this is a pretty decent time to do it. So, right now, the phase that we're in a fat loss phase. My thought is, hey, let's continue to ride this out into the point where it doesn't feel productive. You feel a little bit kind of run down from it, see where you're at body composition wise, and then decide, hey, do we want to go into a build and try to get some more muscle on your frame before you compete, or hey, I'm actually pretty happy with how my shape is looking. Let's just keep kind of doing this dieting process, and then when we get to a point where I can say I think you're about this many weeks out from a show, then we can kind of map out that timeline more concretely and say, are there any shows around kind of this time frame that would make sense based on what we're doing? And so I think that you can kind of set kind of guardrails on those things, but oftentimes I think having a more fluid process makes it less stressful for the athlete and allows them to again enjoy the process to the extent that they can throughout.
Yeah, and I've also heard that sometimes even when people do have like a really concrete, like I'm going to compete at this show, this time, this category, everything, and they have it all planned, but then when they get down to it and they're maybe a few weeks out and they're looking at their physique and they're talking to their coach and it's like, we're not quite there yet. We need a little more time. And so I've heard that that can be something that happens too. So even if you completely plan everything and completely like, you have something that you think is really set in stone, it might or might not be depending on the process and kind of how things go.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And then it's a matter of deciding, like, am I okay stepping on stage at 90% of what I could potentially be? Or do I want to try to push it out to a show where maybe now I have to travel and there's more logistics involved to pick a later date, but I'm going to feel better about kind of the end result of it. So it's always kind of that conversation between coach and athlete about what is most important to them and what's going to work best. And I think that's a really cool part about bodybuilding as well, is developing that relationship with a coach and an athlete. And I always love when I get to work with an athlete for over the course of a competitive career for them, or over the course of a couple of years, to see them really develop and really get to know them, because the more you get to know each other, it goes both ways, right? Like the client getting to know the coach and their communication style, and the coach getting to know their athlete and how they operate best. I think that it's meaningful, but also I think you tend to just get more out of that process as you continue to go on. So I'm excited to kind of see what that looks like over time.
Yeah, I'm really excited to continue to work together and see how things go and see how much progress I can make and how much I can change and shift and try to maintain, my health as best as possible, physically, mentally, emotionally, all the ways as we go through it. I just have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up. I want to know, what are your best tips, just like your number one, or if your top two tips for new bodybuilders, people who are wanting to get into the sport and wanting to dip their toes in the water or jump in, dive in. What are your best tips for them?
The number one thing that comes to mind for me is less is more, and really focusing on recovery. And I think people oftentimes they want to jump right away to, I'm going to do like 6 or 7 days in the week. I'm going to, train for an hour or two. I'm going to, also I'm going to like start a diet at this time, and they just overload themselves with too much. So on the training side of things, I'll do one kind of trip for training and nutrition, then maybe one more generally. So with training, start with less. Oftentimes I'll get a new client. They're like, I could go anywhere between 2 or 3 days a week up to like 6 or 7 days a week. I'm like, great, let's start with 2 or 3. And let's start with, instead of doing, spending 2 hours at the gym, let's spend an hour and really like make these things focused and really put a lot of effort and intention into every single set that I'm doing. So less is more, I think, on the training front. 3 times a week, full body, I think, is a great place to start for like 95% of people who are just getting into the gym. So that's a training thing. With nutrition, honestly, if you're just starting to really pay attention to kind of your nutrition and starting to get into it, you don't have to start. And this is something that, I've kind of learned all the time. You don't have to start immediately with like weighing everything out on the scale, putting everything into a tracking app, like being really meticulous with it. You can, if that's exciting to you. But I think, honestly, at each meal, if you try to have some sort of protein source there and like some fruits or some vegetables, and you eat, 3 to 5 meals per day, and snacks can be included as part of that, that's going to really set up like a solid foundation for you to start. So that would be maybe like a nutrition habit for folks who are just getting started there. And then that third one, that's kind of more general, I would say just having some sort of relaxation or unwinding routine as part of your day or your week. Even if that's just 5 or 10 minutes to read a book, or to, listen to a bit of a podcast or to watch, a 20-minute, Netflix show or something. I think if you incorporate something like that into a part of your day where it feels like self-care and it feels like something that you're doing for yourself, because oftentimes we just go throughout our day like go, 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 and we don't really consider, having a little bit of a time there. So I think if you can do something like that, it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be like meditation or breath work or whatever. Like those things are great. And I think those can, provide a lot of value for folks. But it could even just be something as, hey, I'm going to carve out 10 minutes of my day to do something that is just for me, and it doesn't have to serve any other purpose, just like personal enjoyment. I think that can do a lot for folks. So I think those are maybe 3 little things that people could implement if they're just getting started.
Yeah, those are little things, but they're so impactful. I love those tips so much because they're small and they seem like doable for people and not too dramatic. And that's the point, right? That's a wonderful starting point to say, hey, start with 2 days in a week in the gym, right? Even though you could do 5, how long you're going to be able to sustain 5 if you're going from maybe 0 or 1 to 5, right? And so it's about carving out what's going to work for people and what's going to work for people longer term too, and not just kind of looking at, okay, well you can do 7 days, so let's go, let's schedule it all out and let's just do more is more, right? And taking that downtime and that recovery time is so important too. And with nutrition, it can be as simple as just adding healthier things to your diet if you're not already, or just like trimming some things that maybe aren't as nourishing or as helpful, right? If you're drinking tons of liquid calories, for example, or something like that, and it's like, okay, or that's an easy swap, I'll switch to like 0 sugar things, or whatever the case may be, right? It doesn't have to be this big overhaul and a big like all or nothing, right? So I think that's a really important message and something that you were really getting at with those tips. So that's great. Another thing I wanted to ask you was, what's your favorite part about bodybuilding? Is it stepping on the stage and doing like the show, the performance, or is it more so like some of the lifestyle aspects, like the training or getting your cardio in? I suspect that's not your favorite. That's no one's favorite, but what's your favorite part about bodybuilding?
I did enjoy actually the process of competing, the tanning, the stepping on stage. Like I enjoyed that more than I thought I would,
Cool.
which was kind of surprising to me because I thought it was, it's just this kind of like quirky, like, there's this camaraderie in it that I think is cool. But no, really the bodybuilding for me, I think I do like the routine, the fact that I'm prioritizing my sleep and stress management, and I'm, fueling myself with nutritious food. But really, I think the part that I enjoy the most is the training and going into the gym and pushing myself and seeing what I can do, and kind of this idea of working towards an untapped potential, and like I don't know what I can do, and that's really exciting to me. So every time I go into the gym, putting on my music, having a little bit of a caffeine to enhance the experience for me, just like that pursuit of being present and just being completely focused on the thing that I'm doing and connecting with my body and really feeling internally, this interoception, the process of lifting weights, feeling my muscles contracting, getting a pump, like that's all really exciting for me. Getting a pump basically just means the blood is filling up with a muscle, and that it gets kind of tighter, and at first it can be this weird feeling, but I think you kind of come to like almost enjoy it over time. And so for me, the training and the trying to like, can I do a little bit more weight or add a couple more reps, and pushing myself every time I go in, it's a challenge, and I always feel great afterwards. So that's probably the part about bodybuilding that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, I would have to agree completely. 100% training. Training is the easiest. Check. For me, it's just like that's my happy place right there. And pushing to see what I can do, and like, oh, hey, I'm stronger than I think I am. Surprise, isn't that cool? Or, oh, I couldn't lift this weight this time, but maybe next time, or maybe a week from now, or maybe, down the road, I'll be able to do X, Y, Z. And people sometimes have different goals around that. So that's really cool. Thank you so much for having this chat with me today. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we close things out?
It's been a really fun chat, and as I said at the start, I always enjoy talking about bodybuilding, and also just making it seem more accessible to people, because again, you don't have to feel like this is something you're going to do immediately from the start. You can just start doing some of the things that bodybuilders do, like lifting weights and eating protein, and getting good sleep, and see what you get out of the process over time. So if anybody has been more intrigued by this sort of chat, and you have questions or things that you're wondering, you can feel free to, send me a message on Instagram and say like, hey, I heard you on, Meg's channel. I'm wondering this or that. Please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about it. Like I said, I enjoy, answering questions or really just talking shop with people about it. So just want to say thank you for having me on the channel and for opening up the conversation here. And as we said, I'm looking forward to continuing to work together and build that kind of athlete coach relationship. And yeah, just want to extend that appreciation.
Yeah, thanks. I've really appreciated this chat. It was really fun. I'm sure we could have many, many chats like this. So, people in the audience, if you appreciated this video, let us know in the comment section. Leave us a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Check out Ben on Instagram. And should people go to your YouTube channel, where should we direct people to find you?
Yeah, so YouTube and Instagram are the main platforms that I'm on. YouTube, I'm planning to eventually get back to creating more content there. I'm still trying to figuring out kind of what direction I want to take that channel. If I want it to be more sit down talk or more training in the gym or what that kind of looks like. But I do have some videos up there, videos talking about my experience with competing and kind of just my background. So if you want to know a little bit more about me and my story, the YouTube would probably be a good place to put that. And then my Instagram is where I'm most active, and usually I'm posting, on my stories, maybe, clips of what I'm eating or, stuff from my training, kind of just life candid moments. And you'll get an occasional feed post from me every now and then. So, yeah, I'll give kind of links over to Meg to do that. But most places you can find me, Benji_Prodigy is the nickname there. And yeah, I think that's it.
All right, so everyone watching, go check out Ben's Instagram right now. Go click the follow, go like some posts, go check it out, and check out Vegan Proteins as well. I'll link to them too if you're interested in coaching and bodybuilding specifically. I'll have my links below as always if you're interested in coaching with me for more lifestyle-based situations. Thank you so much to the audience for being here. I appreciate you, and I hope you're having a great day. I will see you in the next video. Bye!
Hey, everyone.